Hello, my name is Melva Covington. I am the co-founder and managing director of People Empowering People for Inclusion Now. I, along with my co-founder Tamara Allen, who is the Chief Visionary Officer, we're honored to bring you this flash talk presentation for today. Pepin, just let me introduce you to Pepin just really quickly. Pepin is a Chicago-based African-American female-owned research, recruitment, and technology firm. We're focused on providing high-touch and high-tech solutions for clinical research with the goal of really to help reduce disparities, improve inclusion, and improve health equity. There's an exclamation point in the middle of our name, and that basically means that we have a sense of urgency to the issues as it relates to inclusion and reducing disparities. Now, really, as we are starting today, we're very excited to really tell you about our value proposition, which is based on not only inclusion, but also focusing on those who have been underrepresented in clinical research. We want to provide evidence and insight to help scale using digital technology and leverage community-based input, if you will, for engagement to create solutions around research participation. We do this by having empowered networks, empowered communities, and empowered study partners in the work that we do. But today, I am very excited to bring you some insight from an innovative leader. She works not only in healthcare and in science, but in digital innovation and really creating solutions on a wide variety of areas. So sit back, listen. I will be your host for today. We're very excited to bring you this talk with Miss Erika Stevens. And so we introduce her today and would like to thank you. Welcome, Erika. Welcome. Please take some time to introduce yourself and we'll jump right in.
Thank you, Dr. Covington. I really appreciate you having me today. I am delighted to be able to support Pepin and the work that you are doing to empower and educate minorities in the facets of not only clinical research, but in terms of health outcomes. And I spent 30 plus years working in clinical research in a variety of job occupations, I'll put it that way. I spent the first part of my career in large-scale academic medicine, working at a number of medical centers, academic medical centers, leading clinical trials offices, clinical research operations, et cetera. Then moved into management consulting, where I had the opportunity to really, I'll say, cut my teeth, if you will, on technology and digital innovation for clinical research and health outcomes as well. And then in the last nearly 3 years, I have the honor of being part of Rutgers Health, where I was recruited to build a fast track master's in clinical research management. And so I'm delighted to be with you today, Melva. Thank you.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I'm so excited. Let's jump right in. Erika, tell me, what keeps you up at night? And if you sleep at night, what keeps you up during the day? Just share some of that with us, if you might, if you will.
Absolutely. So I think probably the biggest thing that continues to get under my skin, Melva, is around the ability to have individuals in healthcare, as well as specifically in clinical research, that are ultimately trained and competent to perform. And this is a very broad topic, but I think what's important about this is that so many times people fall into the industry of clinical research. And I just fell into the occupation. You may have heard that term previously. In fact, an organization that is near and dear to my heart that I've been a member of for a very long time, the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, ACRP, has since also jumped on that to say many people do fall into the industry, much not unmuch like myself, if you will. And I think part of the challenge of that is not only educating the workforce, but also the, I'll say, consumer or customer. In many ways, the research participant or the patient, even in the healthcare space, really does become the downstream end of the innovation, the technology solution, the therapy. And so I think that alignment of finding individuals that are not only competent to perform the individual activities, but really competent about the impact of what we're doing in this industry. Why are we doing it? Not because we want to get our product to market. It's really about proving health outcomes.
Okay, that's excellent. Tell me, how do you really foster leadership and innovation as you work with students, or you begin to really roll out the kinds of thinking or the strategic thinking concepts that you are interested in putting in place? How are you thinking about fostering relationships and innovation amongst students?
So I think one of the things that's unique about the program that I was recruited to build is really this hands-on experiential education. And what's different about that is not so unlike what has existed for many, many years for what I'll call health sciences or allied health professionals and even clinical professionals, such as physicians, nurses, physical therapists, pharmacists, et cetera. But in the clinical research entity, there has not been that same infrastructure in place, in that when you come through and work in this field, there is not the hands-on educational opportunity. And so what I think is exciting about what we've built at our program and what we try to foster is really that C1, teach one, see one, do one, if you will, to go back to the surgical rounds of Halstead so many decades ago now. And I think the other piece around innovation is really providing students the opportunity to have collaborations with industry leaders, have those hands-on experiences, develop, if you will, testing of new product and really capability that aligns both healthcare and technology.
I think that's an excellent lead into my next question, right? Because we've seen really an explosion of wearable devices, digital technologies, different ways of even conducting research. What impact do you see digital technologies and even decentralized clinical trials having within the next 2, 3, or 5 years?
You know, it's interesting. The catchphrase was decentralized clinical trials, particularly at the outset of COVID, right, and the pandemic. And the goal was to expedite and fast track therapy to market, right? So that it could be used for vaccine
Yes.
purposes. And I will say that I've seen a shift even in the last 12 to, I'll say 18 months, whereby even the FDA is Food and Drug Administration is now showing that it's not truly just decentralized clinical trials, but really the modernization of clinical trials. And that includes everything from not only the wearables and the technology, but also this move, or I'll almost say a flashback in many ways, to what we called comparative effectiveness research,
Yes.
Melva, right? And so it was, you can't really compare if you're only looking at one targeted group. And I think that what's important about the modernization of clinical trials is it really is driving not only the increase in technology, but also the emphasis around real world evidence. So large scale data sets to actually produce data that has solid outcome associated with it. I think the other thing that is a huge driver, as you started your opening around the knowledge base of what Pepin truly is about, around reaching and engaging vast groups of minority individuals to participate. And I think, you know, often people consider minority as simply race, and it is not, right? It's not only gender, but socioeconomic status, religious group, you know, physical ability, a variety of those facets. And I think what's important about the inclusivity is that it is truly leveraging and developing that cohesiveness of not only technology, but being able to engage multiple individuals to produce measurable and effective outcome. And I think that that's a differentiator. With respect to technology, I think, you know, there had been such an uptick on computer-based technology solutions for probably a good 10 years in the early 2000, I'll say maybe around 2010. And then as we've seen the movement toward wearables, and interestingly enough, in my Big Four days, we actually did some of the original pilot testing for Fitbit, which seems so archaic now, right? Because there's so much that has come since Fitbit, and that's not to give Fitbit a bad rap, but it's, you know, we've come such a long way. I think the piece that is going to be quite interesting is the intersection of not only the technology, the solutions of data sets, the real world evidence, and truly that intersection of, you know, leveraging compliance around those facets, but also the introduction of AI, right? You've heard AI, AI, AI. Every place we go, you know, there's a new webinar that's being offered on, oh, what does AI mean for healthcare? What does AI mean for research? And I think, you know, as it continues to evolve, we will see more of that. And I think the caveat is, isn't it pretty great if we can leverage AI to not only potentially fast track or streamline the ability to get therapy into actual marketplace sooner. And I don't mean from the margin, Melva, I mean because we can help to impact health outcomes. And I think that that's probably one of the bigger rapid changes in the next 5 years that we will continue to see.
Talk about that just for a little moment, more moments, if you don't mind. Where do you think the gaps are in the thinking? You mentioned it a bit before, right? But what are the things that we may have to look out for, right? Either in terms of the ethical collection of information or in biases that might be imposed as we then think about training AI algorithms and putting things in so that they can be scaled. Do you see any gaps in at least the current thinking that really helps us to say, wait a minute, you have to make sure that you're a little more inclusive, right? You may be missing something. What are your thoughts around that? What is it that you may see or that we may be able to learn from your experience and your knowledge?
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's interesting because I often think of the example of and I'm dating myself probably, Melva, but I think about the red dress campaign for the American Heart Association, right? In that women experience heart disease differently than men, and often, if you think about the early studies, there were no women in the heart disease trials; there were only men, and yet the outcomes and even the way that the disease presents is very different for women than that of men. And I think where we've come, which is a long way, that we now have women in trials, I can continue to articulate that the FDA since 2000, oh, let's see, 19 and on, has continued to release new guidance documents, whether it's, inclusivity of pregnant women in certain clinical trials, including children in clinical trials, including, they call it geriatric populations or older adults, I think is the guidance document title, in cancer clinical trials. And so I do think that there is this nomenclature, and rightly so, based on HRPP or human research protection programs, that there were certain at-risk vulnerable populations that should not necessarily, be included, or at least that was the idea initially, to protect those individuals. I think where that leaves us, though, is the gap that we're not able to effectively include diverse groups of individuals to effectively say, this treatment, this therapy, this new device, this new drug, et cetera, can in fact work for each of these individual groups. If you don't test, right, or include in that evidence, then you are not able to effectively say this is going to work for women, right? It's going to work for children. And so I think that is a piece that continues to ebb and flow. Certainly, I think that regulatory agencies such as FDA is continuing to provide new insight around that. With respect to bias, which I think was really the pointed question that you wove in there, I think the piece that's important to mention about that is there is absolutely implicit bias. I think I shared with you in one of our conversations previously that there has been a large emphasis on, do you even realize as an individual, do we as a society even realize that there is implicit bias? There's some wonderful offering actually out of Ohio State University, and if you haven't seen it, I recommend it. They actually offer a unit module online implicit bias training, which is quite fascinating. And even as simple as, is the color on my back screen the same color purple, Melva, as yours is, right? And it's really quite fascinating to think about that. Well, if you have a, colorblind, you might not see any difference in the two the two screensavers that we have on the background. And so I think what's interesting about that is it does challenge one's own individual perception of, do you have color bias, whatever, even in the screensaver. But also, I think that it is important that as the technologies are developed, as AI is developed and leveraged, that we are resonant to not be blind, pardon the expression, right? But not to be blind to the fact that there could, in fact, be bias that comes out of that. And so that's probably above my technical capability, Melva. But I do think the major outcome for all of this is that by educating individuals, educating the students, educating the workforce, even the downstream, as I said, research participant, that we are better able to improve the ultimate health of society. And that's really why I got into this industry so many years ago.
Absolutely. And to the point that you're making, it's not to know the technical details, for example, of how maybe AI is created or how it evolves, but to know that there are things that we need to look at, there are questions that we need to ask, to make sure, have you thought about this? So if you're using, for example, data that comes from one place to develop an algorithm to apply it to something else and then say, okay, this is what reality is, it's important to ask the questions, where does this come from? Right.
Right.
And so I think that sometimes that gets lost in the conversation. We just see it, it looks great, and we take it as being real, when we know that there's digital twinning. There are different kinds of ways in which you can augment what you actually see, through AI algorithms. They can put people in places where they actually have not been before. So there
Yeah.
are a number of things that we need to think about. I think it leads me to, I think, this final one of the final questions to you, right? Is are there any kind of patient engagement or training activities, in clinical research or even in healthcare programs that you see that are important? So as we engage with people, as we think about, as we train people, as we train healthcare researchers, what insight can you provide us on what we should be thinking about as we are conducting clinical research?
And so I think that is a great segue, not only to meet the, as we started the conversation, of inclusivity, right, and diversity, whether we're talking children or women or aged populations, et cetera, but that there really is this trend, and I'll tell you, I've been at this a long time, so I've seen it originally be called community engagement, and then it's moved into, patient engagement. I've now seen very specific. I'll say cultural and ethnic group specific engagement. For example, and by the way, I can't necessarily take credit for any of this, Melba. I can tell you what we're doing in our program a little bit when I close this thought, but there have been individuals that have continued to focus, and nonprofit organizations such as CISCRIP, right, for the Center of Investigation of Clinical Information Investigation of Clinical Research Participation with Ken Getz, right, out of the Boston area, which has been around a long time, about, hey, how come we're not giving back the results of data or information to those individuals who participate in research? And I think even as we looked at the first iteratives of CTSAs, which are these big, large-scale clinical translational sciences awards for infrastructure and now research hubs that look at training not only from the bench to the bedside of future translational researchers, that there needs to be this importance and significance around truly engaging for the full spectrum. So it's not just, hey, come and be in my study. It's also following up on the back end, right? What is it? What are the results? What's the output? What is the overall impact or effect of this on health? And it's interesting because we certainly pay attention when there are, if you will, bad things that make the press,
Bad
right?
things.
And so, for example, if you followed any of the research post-COVID, there was the thing about Pfizer and their data coordinating center. And then recently there was an Alzheimer's study where the IRB didn't catch something. And I won't say, which IRB, et cetera. But I think that the importance of this is that the level of transparency that's needed across the industry is truly broader than just a single cultural group or engagement. It truly needs to be engagement across the research enterprise, if you want my 2 cents. It should not be a single group. It should not be just the regulatory agency or the member organizations, certifying organizations such as ACRP or SOCRA that I mentioned at the start of the conversation. And I can tell you that there are individuals that have continued to, even pharmaceutical companies that continue to focus on very specific groups or outcomes. So for example, BMS has a Latino emphasis, and I had the opportunity of attending a talk recently whereby they've produced a couple of papers on what are the nuances or differences culturally to engage that particular cultural group, right, into and being involved in clinical research. For example, most people don't know this, but one of the largest Fukienese populations, I think it's the second largest to Asia, to China, is actually in Brooklyn, outside of Manhattan, and near Maimonides Health. And yet most individuals think of, oh, that's not a group of population that we would think about. It's not a separate group, but it is in fact a separate group. And how is it that not only culturally do we engage that group, but also how do we then engage the information in the talk track even after research is conducted, right? Such that there is a change in health outcome. I think in terms of education, to answer the latter part, there are certainly initiatives. There are certainly solutions. I've seen, a couple of solutions out there that even are training research professionals, almost like some of the virtual stuff, Melva, and I'm not doing it justice
Yeah,
in the tech space, but you can put on this set of virtual glasses.
virtual reality.
Yeah, like the reality glasses, but it's often used even in the Department of Defense for war in if you will, planning, or firefighters, et cetera, right? But I think in the clinical research space, it's everything from even that patient encounter. And I can tell you that in the program or track that I lead, we have various opportunities where we engage with real live individuals that are working in cultural differences, even in as far as South Africa, whereby they are leveraging different cultural nuances and identifying how is it that we in fact engage this group or this target population. What is different about, for example, this group of individuals versus that of another. And so I do think that there's opportunity to continue to educate, to not only have students be in a setting where they can observe, but also shadow in the informed consent process, right? Or go to a research day that is held at a Black Baptist church, Melba, or, I'm just thinking about some of the other opportunities, right, that exist. And I do think that the great thing is that COVID put clinical research on the map. Terrible that a pandemic did it. But if you think about even in the late 90s, there's an image on, and I'll send it to you as a follow-up after our talk, but there's an image that was on the cover of Time magazine where it showed a person in a cage, if you know it, right? I mean, it's an oldie for those of us who've been in this for a very long time, right? And so I think what's fascinating about that is instead of being perceived as the guinea pig, truly individuals are now becoming aware that clinical research truly is an option, but it's also an option that is ultimately for the greater good of improving health outcomes.
I think that's amazing. Your work is just so inspiring, and you are just so inspiring. Please give us the last thoughts of what you would want this audience to hear from you, not only in terms of the greatness that you have done and who you are, because of just the amazing work that you have done and the experiences that you've had, but also what you think is important as we then navigate this road in the future.
So I think if I were putting myself in the role or the seat of the patient or the research participant, the most important thing is to continue to ask. Don't be shy about asking. Don't just say yes. That's not the purpose of this talk, right, Melva? It's not to say, oh, yes, absolutely, I'm going to participate in whatever that clinical trial might be or clinical research, but rather advocate for yourself. Continue to expose yourself to being educated. I think I shared, Melva, in many of our conversations that I'm a late life mommy, and one of the things I often say is you can't believe everything you find on Google or Wikipedia. And so I will caution that even for those individuals who are coming to Pepin to learn about how they can advocate for themselves in terms of their own health outcomes, it is important to ask questions, and when in doubt, ask more. And I think for the future generation of clinical research professionals, I will say that we are moving more closely to not only the competencies that have been credentialed and recognized, I would say more universally now, that came out of MRCT and Harvard and Brigham, et cetera, that, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, I can also give you that from a link, Melva, but there's the joint competencies for clinical research professionals. And I think that even though those have been established, we have not necessarily moved the needle for what is it that helps an individual to come full circle back to that opening question of what keeps me up at night, back to that credentialing of, yes, I know in fact that this individual Dr. Covington, et cetera, is credentialed, not because of a degree, but they're competent to perform that skill, right? There is truly that opportunity to assess and say, yeah, I know, I've seen her do it. Just like you would a phlebotomist, right? That you've seen them do the blood draw. And I think we are moving closer to that. So that's what's exciting for me as well, having been in this industry for such a long time. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and the wonderful work that Pepin is doing to educate. And I look forward to future conversations, and also to see what else comes out of Pepin. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. You, Miss Erika Stevens, you have the last word, and we thank you so much for joining us today. That's a wrap. People empowering people for inclusion now. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Erika.
Thank you.